Patel says there's no enemies list. The White House laid out the numbers. A list existed. 20 names already faced consequences, and Patel still can't explain the pattern.
Thank you, sir.
When you were here for your confirmation, we talked about your so-called enemies list. It appears to me that there have been adverse actions of various kinds taken against about 20 of the 60 people on your enemies list. You've been in office for 7 months. At that rate, you've got 14 months until you've hit all 60. Can you explain that?
Again, that is an entirely inaccurate presupposition. I do not have an enemies list. You can continue to characterize it as you wish. The only actions we take, generally speaking, for personnel at the FBI are ones based on merit and qualification and your ability to uphold your constitutional duty. You fall short, you don't work there anymore.
Well, there was a list. You don't like it to be called an enemies list, and it had about 60 names, and about 20 have had an adverse action. So those are, I think, pretty clear facts. Let me move on to your grand jury testimony, which we also talked about when you were here. I think you indicated that you understood that a witness in the grand jury is free to discuss afterwards whatever they told the grand jury. And you then went on to suggest saying, I can't go into court orders granted by the D.C. District Chief Judge, and you want me to violate a court order. In those remarks, you fairly plainly suggested that there was a court order of some kind that somehow restricted or limited your ability to discuss your own testimony to that grand jury. Since then, that chief judge that you mentioned, Judge Boasberg, has written, and I'm quoting him here, Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 6E allows witnesses like Patel to divulge the contents of their testimony, meaning that nothing was preventing him from doing so before the committee. Can we confirm here today that there is no court order of any kind that limits your ability as a witness before the grand jury to discuss your own testimony to that grand jury?
We can confirm that pursuant to my action that grand jury testimony has been released, the transcript.
Let's, in what forum was it released, may I ask?
Publicly.
Okay, we'll check.
This exchange matters because it ties two serious accountability issues into the same frame: retaliation and truthfulness. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse wasn't speculating or exaggerating. He was laying out a pattern and asking Patel to explain it on the record. Whitehouse started with simple math. Patel had previously circulated what he now disputes, calling it an enemies list, but the list was real. Roughly 60 names, and about 20 of those individuals have since faced adverse actions. 7 months into Patel's tenure, that ratio alone raises a legitimate oversight concern. Whitehouse wasn't accusing motive, he was asking for an explanation of outcomes. In accountability hearings, outcomes matter more than intent. Patel's response was to reject the premise outright. He insisted there is no enemies list and framed all personnel actions as merit-based. That's the standard institutional defense whenever retaliation is alleged. But Whitehouse's follow-up exposed the weakness. Changing the label doesn't change the facts. If a list existed, and a significant portion of people on it later faced negative consequences, Congress is obligated to ask whether those actions were coincidental or coordinated. This is where people need to understand something key. Retaliation cases are rarely proven by a single smoking gun document or confession. They are built through patterns, timing, and correlation. Oversight hearings exist to surface those patterns before they harden into precedent. Whitehouse was signaling that the pattern now demands explanation. The second half of the exchange may be even more serious. Whitehouse turned to Patel's prior statements about his grand jury testimony. Patel had suggested court orders prevented him from discussing what he told a grand jury, even naming the chief judge of the D.C. District Court as the source of that restriction. That claim carried weight. Witnesses, especially senior officials, are expected to understand and accurately describe legal limits. But since that testimony, the Judge Patel cited publicly clarified that federal rules explicitly allow grand jury witnesses to discuss their own testimony. In other words, there was no court order blocking Patel from answering Congress's questions. At the time he claimed there was. That's not interpretation, it's black-letter law. Whitehouse's questioning was precise for a reason. He wasn't asking Patel to relitigate the substance of his testimony. He was asking whether Patel had misrepresented legal constraints to Congress. When Patel responded by saying the transcript has now been released, Whitehouse drilled down. Where, how, and under what authority? Because releasing something later does not excuse misleading Congress earlier. For anyone watching, this distinction is critical. Congressional oversight depends on truthful explanations of what officials can and cannot say. When an official invokes non-existent legal barriers, it obstructs oversight just as effectively as outright refusal. That's why Whitehouse framed this not as a misunderstanding, but as a credibility issue. Taken together, these two lines of questioning paint a troubling picture. On one side, a list of perceived adversaries followed by adverse actions. On the other, misleading claims about legal restrictions that conveniently shielded the same official from scrutiny. Whitehouse wasn't alleging crimes. He was establishing a record, and records are how accountability eventually happens. This exchange shows why oversight is not harassment and not politics. It is a safeguard. Institutions do not lose credibility all at once. They lose it when patterns go unexplained and false justifications go uncorrected. If you believe no public official should be able to punish critics or mislead Congress without consequences, stay engaged. Share this video, leave your thoughts in the comments,